Heroin. Heroin fills the void. It makes you feel warm, loved, open. But that's only for a little bit. It almost works in filling the void created by no human interaction until you're hooked on the drug. See, humans have an innate need to connect, but when life beats us down, throws us challenging obstacles to deal with, or gives us a traumatic experience to handle, we'll turn to other things to connect with, whether that be constantly checking our phones, gambling, social media, or hard drugs. These are all behaviors that people turn to when they feel disconnected from society and from themselves. When they're in a warm and loving environment, they turn to something that is good to connect with, such as family, friends, or the people around them. See, as Dr. Mate said, compassion for oneself is easier when another compassionate person is also present. It is easier when you have the support of people around you who are loving, caring, and are there for you. There are currently, in our city and around the world, people struggling through their own self-compassion. A lot of them don't have that opportunity to have a person who can be compassionate towards them. The self-compassion isn't there, and the longer the support is not there, the harder it is to get out of the cycle. During the pandemic, there was a literal physical barrier stopping people from connecting with each other. There are some apps such as Zoom, but it did not replace that face-to-face interaction. People were more susceptible to loneliness, but we were well on the trajectory of more people abusing drugs to replace something in their lives. In 2012, the province of British Columbia had 207 deaths from illicit drug toxicity. In the month of January 2022 alone, there were 207 deaths from illicit toxicity. 6 people on average are dying daily in Vancouver from drug overdose. This means 180 people every month and 2,160 people every year. That's the number of documented overdoses, not the actual number. Vancouver struggled with an opioid crisis since 1995. The people suffering from loneliness has risen too. There's a correlation between number of deaths, drug use, and people who are generally suffering from loneliness. They turn to something that is easier, something that will comfort them, something that will be compassionate with them. So where does this begin? Endorphins. You're already familiar with them. Any activity that makes you happy releases endorphins, such as sports, dance, and even hanging out with friends. Endorphin release is followed by a natural hit of dopamine, which make you feel very good. Opioids were developed as a form of pain relief, which is why morphine is used in hospitals right now. When you're in pain, endorphins are released into the body as a response. Opioids derived from the infamous poppy plant were developed in labs in the 1920s as a form of pain relief. They include heroin, codeine, morphine, oxycodone, and fentanyl. All of them are addictive because they give you a high when injected or ingested into the body. They bind to the same receptors as endorphins and cause the excess release of dopamine, so you get hooked on the drug without knowing. Imagine you broke your leg and are in the hospital. You're in a lot of pain and need relief. You're also bored and alone. In the hospital with a broken leg, your intention isn't recreational drug use. You're trying to relieve your pain. You're also bored and alone. This means you might press the morphine button a little too often, not realizing that each excess flood of dopamine is making you physically dependent on the drug. You're taking care of your pain and boredom, but in the process, you're getting addicted to morphine. As researchers at Johns Hopkins have studied, it takes about 2 weeks to be physically dependent on an opioid. Imagine getting addicted to a drug when all you're trying to do was relieve your pain. The idea of what addiction means to humans comes solely off an experiment that was started in the early 1900s. A rat was put into a locked cage and given 2 bottles, one with regular water and one with water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every trial that was run of this experiment, the rat would get addicted to the drug-laced water and slowly kill itself. However, in the 1970s, a scientist by the name of Bruce Alexander noticed that the rats had nothing to interact with except the drug-laced water. He built Rat Park, where many rats were placed together. They had food, ideal living conditions, and places to play and have fun. Once again, they had access to the drug-laced water and the regular water. In this new scenario, the rats would rarely drink the drug-laced water, and when they would never overindulge and they would never overdose. Now, you're probably wondering how a rat experiment applies to humans. And even though it wasn't intentional, when American soldiers went to fight in Vietnam, they were in a similar situation. Reports came back that soldiers were using copious amounts of heroin. If you're in a dangerous foreign forest with imminent death upon you, it was thought that heroin would be a great way to pass the time. However, when the soldiers came back, they just stopped using, and most of them did not even go into withdrawal. The soldiers just went back into their daily lives. This was the same as taking the rat out of the isolated cage and placing it into Rat Park. When you take a human out of an isolated, scary place and give them friends, family, a stable income, and places to relieve the stresses of everyday life, addiction becomes non-existent. Connections and interactions are vital to making sure that addiction does not transpire. Now, I want you to close your eyes and imagine you're somewhere new. You don't know anyone. You can't communicate how you're feeling. No connection to anyone who understands you. No text messages, no phone calls, no notifications. Just you. No one to eat dinner with. No one to share how your day went. No one to tell how you're feeling. Just you and your thoughts. So you turn to the one thing that will make you feel loved, make you feel wanted. Open your eyes. This is the reality for many immigrants, Indigenous, and mentally ill people. Immigrants have just left what is familiar and are in a new environment where they haven't gotten the opportunity to build connections. Indigenous people have gone through over 100 years of trauma and have watched brothers and sisters get taken away in their own home. And there's a stigma created around mentally ill people, so people leave them alone, isolate them. When people feel like this, they want relief from their pain. One solution that they know of is drug use. Once you're addicted to a drug, your body physically craves it. Biologically, you can't live without it. When you stop taking it, you go into withdrawal. It affects everything, your appearance, your health, your being, and most importantly, your social interactions. You can't interact with people like you did before. All you can think about is your next hit because it makes you feel good. You don't realize that what you need is social connection. So you go back to heroin. You lose your job. You drain your financial resources because heroin is not cheap. You go through this endless cycle until you overdose or get caught and get sent to prison for 6 months to up to 7 years, depending on how much is found on you. You get put in a literal cage for being lonely, and this further isolates you. As the cycle continues, bridges get burnt, and there's an overall breakdown in your life. In a world where people choose square feet over genuine human connection and spending time face-to-face, it is vitally important to have a support system in place. You need to make sure that you are mentally and physically healthy. For decades, the war on drugs has punished people for being lonely and has, in essence, increased drug consumption around the world. So we need to rethink how we approach drug use. Instead of increasing their isolation, we need to create a human Rat Park where everybody together can collectively contribute and succeed. Now, all hope is not lost, although I'd understand why you think that. There are many things being done around the world to curb that problem. One of the challenges for treating addiction is that people die from overdose before they can deal with their addiction. Therefore, in Canada, Dr. Mark Tyndall, an epidemiologist and an infectious disease specialist, has created and piloted the MySafe machine. It's basically an opioid vending machine in which addicts can access clean hydromorphone as an alternative to heroin. But hydromorphone does not replace heroin or fentanyl. It does not produce the same effect. So, in another program by PHS Community Services, patients are evaluated and given prescriptions for fentanyl, so they do not have to go to drug dealers. Both of these programs allow drug users to deal with their addiction before they overdose. In Iceland, huge amounts of teens were abusing drugs and drinking at young ages. In 1997, the government dealt with this issue by encouraging parental interaction and playing sports and implementing a curfew for children between the ages of 13 and 16, a curfew that is still in place today. Improving social interaction through family relationships and sports, as well as the natural high from physical activity, caused a dramatic decrease in drinking and drug use. The policy has sustained a long-term impact. In the 1990s, Portugal was the heroin capital of Europe. In 2001, a law was passed that changed that. Instead of going to prison on a possession charge, you are evaluated based on your character and state of mind by a panel of social workers, doctors, and lawyers. If you agreed to receive the help that was given and did not appear before the panel again, the case was closed. There was no fear of permanent record because, as psychologist Francisco Miranda Rodriguez has said, you can't help people who are afraid to go to jail. The heroin usage in Portugal dropped from 100,000 to 25,000 in just under 20 years. When we're willing to make change, change is possible. Addiction is not just drugs. It's video games, it's TV, it's using your phone, it's gambling, and it's eating. It's not a problem that is specifically tailored to a particular kind of person, a quote-unquote bad person who likes drugs. The issue, although, is magnified with drugs because you're becoming physically dependent on debilitating drugs. But what you're craving when you start is social interaction, which all of us understand. I hope that people take a leap of faith. Reach out to someone who is feeling isolated. Give hope to someone who is feeling isolated. Build empathy out of compassion because we are not so different. Thank you.